I think we're all in the business of city building. So we have an obligation to our fellow citizens, to our children, to try and leave something that's a little bit better than we found it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Development Insights podcast, where we bring you ideas, experiences, and best practices from the real estate development industry. My name is Hayam Noor Salehi. I'm the president of Denna Project Management, where we help real estate developers define, design, and deliver successful projects. My guest for this episode is Stuart Wilson. Stuart Wilson is a seasoned leader in the real estate development and construction industry and currently serves as the president of Alterra Development and Construction Management. With more than 30 years of international experience, he brings deep expertise in development strategy, financial modeling, and alongside full cycle development and construction execution. Over the course of his career, Stuart has consulted on more than 500 development projects across high-rise residential, hotels, institutional, retail, commercial, cultural, and sports sectors in Canada and also internationally. In this episode, we want to try and dig into all these awesome experiences and insights and learn lessons. As always, you can find more information about our guest and this episode on our website, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. That's all one phrase. Thank you for listening to the show. Please remember to subscribe. Enjoy listening. Good morning, Stuart. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm very well. Nice weekend. I'm nice and relaxed. I've had my yoga and I've had my tennis.
Awesome. That's a great start to a great day, hopefully. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience, tell us a little bit about your background, and we go from there?
Absolutely. My name is Stuart Wilson. I am the president of Alterra Developments. I am not, like many of your listeners, probably not from Canada. So I started off in Scotland. I studied in Glasgow. I am a quantity surveyor. I also have a master's degree in construction management. From Glasgow, I went to Hong Kong. I spent 3 years in Hong Kong working on large civil projects. Really enjoyed it, probably out of my depth. One of the funny stories about that was we were doing this large underground station in Hong Kong, and it was only about 20 years later that I realized that the thing was so over-designed because it ended up being the foundation for a 120-story tower. That's how out of my depth
It only took 20 years.
So I came to Canada in 1999. I worked as a quantity surveyor with Hellier, which became Altus Group, leading the charge down there. Really enjoyed it. And I joined Alterra Developments about 10 years ago, went from chief operating officer to president. And I'm in charge of really all operations, both the business side and the technical side.
Fantastic. Thank you for the intro. Why the jump? Did you get bored going through numbers and seeing other people making money? Was that the reason?
Do you want the real answer?
No, please tell me a lie.
I'd actually always wanted to be a developer. I'd wanted to move several years before that, but my wife and I agreed some financial targets, and when we hit those, first phone call I made was to Rob Cooper, who's our CEO, and I haven't looked back since.
So it was a planned move, and it seems to be a common planned move. I know Marlon Bray, our previous guest here on this podcast, he made this move recently, not too far ago. And I guess the background really helps with the new role.
I think it's a challenging move to make. To be a quantity surveyor, you typically have to be fairly conservative. And I think to be a developer, you have to be fairly optimistic. So to go from one to the other is not common. And I know Marlon very well. In fact, we were texting over the weekend. It's a difficult jump, but you have to I am naturally fairly optimistic. So it possibly wasn't quite as difficult for me.
Can you share some tricks with that? Because I know side of the table, as a project manager, as a construction manager, you're always thinking about risk. You're thinking about flagging risk, dealing with it at different stages. And like you said, it makes optimism a little bit unnatural, or at least less practiced. Do you have any tricks or skills that can help the transition?
I don't think there's any tricks. Ultimately, there is money to be made in every business, and development is no different. I think understanding how the component pieces come together, how the jigsaw puzzle is built is really important, because within the line items of every budget, there's probably 100 soft cost items and probably 200 hard cost items. There are places to save money and there are places to spend money. And I think it's that balance of spending in the right places, saving in the right places, and trying to build a great product. So let me jump into that for a second because it is really important.
Please
and I spend quite a bit of my time focusing on this. So one of the things that frustrates me is where people try and save money. We're all human beings. If you're moving into an apartment or you're moving into a condo or you're moving into a house, the areas that you enjoy, the things that you enjoy are what you can see in front of you, the tactile things, the things that give you design pleasure. So what are those items? It's your flooring, it's your finishes, it's your door hardware, your door knobs, your kitchens, your bathrooms, everything that you interact with, your light fixtures. So if you look at your average hard cost budget, probably about 6 or 7% of it is going to be the finishes, the things you can actually enjoy. Your taps, another one. So nothing upsets me more than when we get to the point in the project where we're trying to value engineer and some genius comes up with the idea of doing cheaper flooring or cheaper bathroom vanities or cheaper taps. That's just not where you should be spending money. You've already lost the battle at that point. We spend a lot of our time here looking at the structure. If you can focus on your structure as part of your first design stage, even before the architect's involved, or at least hand in hand with the architect, if you can start with your structural framing and move out from that point, you have a good chance of winning the war. No purchaser has ever walked into one of our developments and said, my goodness, it feels so solid. How much rebar have you put behind these walls? It just doesn't come up. There's a basic understanding that the building will not fall down. If you can save X millions of dollars on your formwork and your rebar and your concrete through smart design, then you can, at the very least, not try and value engineer the finishes, but actually enhance the finishes, make better lobbies, better amenities, things that people feel proud to actually engage with in their building. So there's one of the...
I love that answer, by the way. I come from a structural engineering background. And one of the things that many times we talk to our clients or even internally on the projects that I've had the privilege of working on is that let's figure out the structure first. And sometimes in advance of actually hiring the architect, sometimes we have, like, I know there has been instances that we'd had to choose the right architect based on the type of structure we wanted to use and kind of line things out. When we're the less conventional type of structures that we've used, we've had to get creative. And to your point, when you look at the proforma, when you look at not the proforma, look at the hard cost budget of a structure, of a project, at least in these mid-rise type projects, your structure direct cost could be somewhere between 25, 30, maybe 35%, depending on what systems you're using. But the indirect cost of the wrong or right structure, like you mentioned, it has significant effect. Like these days on these smaller buildings, we have a lot of conversation about wood and mass timber, which are great products in different scales. But then some people tend to forego the additional cost that you have to incur when it comes to fire ratings, seasonalities, acoustics, and everything else that goes into using those products. But it's an indirect cost of the structure. I very much appreciate you bring that up. Let's talk about Alterra for a second. The principles that you just mentioned in terms of finishes and the structure and value engineering. Alterra has been around 50 years, right? More than 5 decades. You've had hundreds of different projects. Are those some of the core principles behind the success of the company as a whole, or are those some things that you're trying to bring into the business?
I'd say probably a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I can't really speak to the 4 decades that came before me. I will say the success of the business, from what I can see, is really one of integrity. I think the principles before I arrived, Rob and Richard Cooper built a business based on honesty, good design, good product. And I think that carries a long way. They have a good reputation. And in fact, when I was ready to move to development, that's why I phoned Rob. I think I dealt with many clients over the years, the vast majority of whom were honest, good, decent people. I think certain developers had a bit of a reputation the other way, and I think it was really important for me to land in a company that had strong integrity, dealing with consultants, dealing with their lenders, dealing with their customers. I think one of the things, it's not just value engineering, but I think that the product that we build is really important. I think we're all in the business of city building. So we have an obligation to our fellow citizens, to our children, to try and leave something that's a little bit better than we found it. So I get a lot of compliments on some of the buildings that we've built. I often joke that it just shows you the lack of control we have over our architects and our design team. But the fact is, we are at the table with the design team. We hire architects who have a strong design ethic, who build excellent buildings, and I think it's really important. I have 3 daughters, and it's really important to me that when I take them around the projects, that they're actually proud of what their father's doing, and I think that translates into the whole city building ethos. So Alterra's success really is a combination of many things, but really just trying to do the best that we can in every situation. And of course, that doesn't mean gold toilets and putting diamonds on the outside of buildings, but doing the right thing from start to finish is important.
So would that principle, and I know obviously over the past few years, there has been a lot of change in the market situation, and a lot of people, and I believe you guys are including that trend, that are exploring PBRs and purpose-built rentals versus condos. Is there any difference the way you look at the two products? Are there defining or groundbreaking rules that you use in one and not the other?
It's an excellent question and very pertinent to where we are in the market right now. I think the condo market has been on steroids for 25 years. Since I arrived in 1999, we've built, I believe, 400,000 or 500,000 condos in the GTA, a staggering amount. The difference, though, for me that I'm really enjoying is I think the condo market in general got to a point where, as an industry, we had maybe sacrificed a certain, I wouldn't say quality, but I think we'd focused on smaller units. We'd focused less on maybe what human beings need as opposed to what the investor market was asking us to produce. So the nice thing about moving to purpose-built rentals is that the thought process is similar but slightly different. And the key characteristic is every time we look at a suite layout, every time we look at a lobby, every time we look at amenities, every time we look at back of house, we're looking at it with the lens of having to operate and own this long term. A good example is, how does the mailroom work? How does the parcel room work? How does the back of house garbage work? Fairly boring and mundane items. But the fact is, if we're going to have to hire staff to deal with all those items in the future, I'm not saying that we didn't think about it before, but the fact is it was going to be somebody else's problem as someone that was running a condo. And if we always did the right thing, we never cut corners in that regard. But I think that extra level of focus to make sure that everything is thought through, when I'm visually walking myself on plans through that lobby, I'm really understanding how it feels as a renter to be part of that. Wait times in elevators, how they interact with the amenity space. Is their suite large enough? Is there enough room to eat dinner? Is there enough room to sit and watch TV? Is there enough room for friends to be over? And I think as a result of that, we're going to be building better buildings. We're going to be designing better buildings. And I think in the future, the condo market will benefit from the lessons that we're all teaching ourselves building rental apartment buildings.
To your point, I think what happened when we were building all these condos, and we've talked about this on this podcast, that we were building a financial product. It was not much different than a package ETF that you can buy on the stock exchange with, obviously with not that simplicity, but with that mentality that you want to pick up something that you can easily sell to the next person after the investor. And got us into trouble to some source. And right now in the PBR, you have to think about it. And I like this saying, and I'm hoping I get this right. I think it was Brandon Whitsitt from Alterra Development. We had him on the podcast, and he said that the difference on the PBR side is that you're going to have to sell it 100 times potentially. Hopefully not, but 100 times potentially you have to sell it. Versus you build a condo and you sell it once on a piece of paper with black line drawings, which have a whole bunch of disclaimers in terms of this could not be exactly what you get at the end. But when you have the obligation or the vision that you're going to walk people year after year through the building, through the unit, like you said, the importance of the finishes, the layouts, the workability, the moving room, the garbage room, all those become very, very important. With that note, I want to switch gears. I want to go to somewhat of a unique experience that I know you guys have at Alterra, and you and I had a chat briefly offline about your engagement with CreateTO. There is that CreateTO And maybe I asked you to elaborate a little bit more, but basically my understanding is that CreateTO, as part of City of Toronto, is trying to unlock dozens of sites in city and create affordable housing of different layers, different tiers. And you guys were one of the pioneers in engaging with them in CreateTO programs. I believe it's on Wilson Avenue, if I'm not wrong.
Vic Park, Victoria Park.
Vic Park area. And then, please walk us through that. What are the lessons learned? What are the challenges? What can others learn from what you've been through?
It's a lot to unpack. So first of all, there's too many people at CreateTO to mention. We've had a very positive experience with CreateTO, I would say, over the last 3 years. We got involved with them 6 years ago. We actually, pre-COVID, were awarded the 777 Vic Park project. And it was a challenge. I think COVID, the economics were upside down, rents were down, costs went through the roof. So we had a real challenge trying to figure out how this project was going to come to life. There was a changing of the guards at CreateTO. We were banging our heads up against the brick wall for a while. I think there was a suggestion that we may have been taking advantage, which really wasn't the case. The fact is the economics had changed. Vic Gupta and his team came in, and honestly, they are top class, world class. They really understand and care about the product that they're trying to bring and the changes they're trying to bring to the city of Toronto. Not saying that we didn't have our fun and games along the way trying to get to the right answer and the right solution, but it was done with respect. It was done with pragmatism, and I'm extremely happy with the relationship that we developed with these people. So together we're unlocking a city green pea parking lot. We're going to be creating two very distinct products. The first is the most important for the city, 256 units of affordable housing. Do a 10,000 square foot daycare, which is much, much needed in the city. To the side of that, and distinct from the affordable housing component, is going to be 449 units of a luxury rental. And these projects can absolutely coexist within the city, and I think that's the beauty of it. Just because one group has less economic means at their disposal, that doesn't mean anything. The fact is you get good people and bad people who have money and do not have money. And I honestly believe that if you give people excellent rental products, they will treat them with respect and they'll be delighted to live in them. So the products that we're building, although one is a luxury tower, the other one will be given the same quality of finishes, same quality of respect. Yeah, I'm really excited about how this is going to play out. We built the Ace Hotel a few years ago, and I may have mentioned to you offline, it was possibly the proudest moment of my career was having the first beer in that bar. Building a hotel during COVID was like marching to your own execution. Nobody was traveling, nobody was eating, nobody was staying in hotels, and we spent a lot of money trying to build a beautiful hotel, which we did. So that was such a proud moment in my career, and I honestly believe that will be beaten when I see the first families moving into our affordable housing project. And CreateTO deserve a lot of credit for that. They've followed through, they've unlocked so much value in this city, and they're following a strong set of guidelines on how it should be done. So yeah, we're very proud to be their partners, and it's been a very warm relationship so far.
Fantastic. If you were to give a fellow developer some pointers, because they don't have a shortage of lots. CreateTO, I recently saw a couple of other RFPs out and trying to get other people involved. If you were to give a fellow developer some pointers in terms of how they can go through this process smoother, how they can be potentially better prepared to deal with some of the regulations, and I'm sure at the end of the day, CreateTO is a public entity. They need to look after the benefits of the public. They can't, understandably and rightfully, they cannot act as nimble and as quick as a private entity can. So what would be some of the things that someone who wants to approach a CreateTO project should keep in mind to make the journey less painful?
Wow. That's a very interesting question. First of all, if I'm honest, I would tell every developer not to bother because I'd like to bid on some of these projects. So I'm not looking for more competition.
I was not hoping for that answer.
But the answer you are looking for is, look, if you're bidding on a CreateTO project with a view to trying to get rich, then this is not the project for you. we went into this process completely differently. I think there is always investors that have to be taken care of on our side, but we actually looked at it that we'd been very fortunate in how we benefited from the market being on fire for 25 years, and we saw this as an opportunity to actually give back and try and upgrade our status in the city and how we were giving back to the city that benefited all of us. So I think profits are going to be extremely tight. If you're going into it with an economic view, you're going to struggle. You have to go into these projects with a social view. So you are going to be asked by CreateTO and the city solicitors to do things that you don't want to do. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. There's a lot of reporting. There's a lot of legal work. If you don't like reading legal agreements and understanding them, then I would not get into this. If you don't already have a good lawyer, I would definitely get one that really understands complex agreements. But my advice would be take your developer and take your investor hat off and go into it trusting the process, trusting that you can actually create something better for your city. And I think the rewards will come in time, but you also have to fight hard for what you're getting from CreateTO. There may be some concessions that you want and you need. Maybe the project just doesn't work, proforma doesn't work without it. But I think CreateTO have figured out over the course of the last 6 years with us and others that there has to be rigor on the upfront process. There has to be an RFP that has to be adhered to. We recently responded to one and we were unsuccessful, which was very disappointing. But we spent so much time upfront understanding exactly what was being asked of us. And I think that would be the big piece of advice is be meticulous in how you review what's being asked of you. Be meticulous in understanding the requirements that the city have in place. And it's not just on building codes. There's a whole bunch of social and ethical issues that go into these buildings. They come at a price. You have to hire consultants. You have to do a lot of legwork. And you really understand what you're bidding on because the process has been tightened up to the point that you can't just go in with a bid and then hope to improve it later. The last one that we did, we lost it, I think, because of our economic model. And we genuinely wish the people that have won that bid good luck because we felt we were about as tight as we could go. So, yeah, just be careful and be meticulous.
It's a tight proforma. I would 100% agree. I know we looked at the most recent RFP, or not the most recent, a couple of months ago, we looked at one of these RFPs and 100% agree. First of all, it was really vague. And obviously we haven't had the privilege of you guys having gone through it and understanding it fully. So it was our first time looking at an RFP like that. And weeks into it, we're like, listen, like we don't think we can figure this out in time. And we pretty much gave up with the team that we're working on. But I guess there's something to be said about CreateTOs and maybe, to your point, bringing more clarity to how they are reaching out to enable other people, because the particular site that we were looking at, it was a tough site. It was a small site. We couldn't do too many things on it. It might have been the same one you were talking about. And the development team was a smaller team and they were not willing to take on that much risk in terms of going in. I want to spin your answer because it triggered another thought in my mind. We've had Mariga from Wood Green Community Services, which is a nonprofit organization. We've had Andrea Adams from St. Clair's Affordable Housing. We've had both of them on the show. We've talked about affordable housing. I'm trying to help a few affordable housing and community providers in the city of Toronto. One of the things that keeps coming up is that the land is there, they own the property, they have some asset, but to get that parcel of land to a finish line, to a development process, through the development process, and to get it to even to a point that basically it can be funded through government grants, such as CMHC or otherwise, they're facing a lot of trouble. And from my perspective, it's a waste because these are good parcels, they're in a good location, they have the services, they have the community support behind them. That same community wants to build them. Given that you've gone through this experience with CreateTO, do you have any pointers or suggestions to the owners of these parcels or to our city people, our authorities and people in charge in terms of how we can enable those projects?
You've obviously jumped into the specifics with these particular parcels where I haven't, so I'm a bit of a disadvantage. But without inserting myself into the process, I think it involves a lot of deep conversations and a lot of what ifs and a lot of trying to figure out where, and it all comes down to dollars and cents. Where can you save money? There's a number of triggers and levers that the city are able to pull. And there's a lot of triggers and levers that the province and the feds can pull as well. And we've heard the talking heads on LinkedIn and whatnot saying everybody just has to work together. And of course, in its simplest form, that is correct. But the actual act of getting everyone to work together, the simple act of going cap in hand to these groups and trying to get them to either give grants, reduce fees or levies or anything that they control is really the key. And I would say we have a project that we're doing with Wood Green as well, a condo right now, where we're going to be giving them 7 units, 7 condos, lock, stock and barrel as part of our Section 37. And we're excited to work with Wood Green on that. So we do know them, but it is going through every line item in that proforma with the Housing Secretariat, with CreateTO, with whoever is prepared to sit down and try and figure out some type of methodology that will reduce the cost and increase the viability of that project. And I do think they're open to it, especially for a full not-for-profit like Wood Green. I think everybody wants to achieve something better. If you go through the costs that we have, and I was on another podcast recently where I read a lot of these out, but bathtubing adds a lot of costs.
100%.
We're going to be removing that shortly. But there's bike parking, there's heritage, there's street staging, there's urban design costs, there's land transfer tax, there's Ministry of the Environment, there's short-term water discharge. All these have a fee associated with them, and they're all within the purview of either municipal government or the provincial government. And you just have to unwind those regulations. I don't know how you do that, but you have to, someone in City Hall has to be able to put their hand up and go, okay, we're giving you a pass on these 10 things, and that will unlock the viability for these not-for-profits.
You're absolutely right. We have these conversations offline, and there are, especially when it comes to smaller scale developments and these mid-rise buildings, it's I joke with some of our colleagues and say this is a death by 1,000 costs. Basically, that's what it is. Like you said, there's not one big. There are single huge items such as the DC charges and levies and stuff. But aside from those, there are 1,000, probably another 999 line items, which are individually might not be standing out as such, but they do tend to kill these projects. And they don't necessarily help. You've worked in private sector, you've worked in civil, you've worked internationally, you've been leading Alterra for the past decade, and you've now, obviously, we talked about your CreateTO experience for the past 6 years. What does a good partnership look like? How do you select a good partner in your project? Because the reason I ask this is that for that type of, again, nonprofit or smaller development team, partnership is almost inevitable. Like you need to enter into partnerships to make things work. What are some criteria, some red flags that you look for based on your experience and say, you know what, this partnership could work. These are the things we will do or we will not do. These are the red lines that we will not cross when we think about a partnership.
So the first thing you have to think about with a partnership is the amount of time you are going to be spending together. So you may not necessarily be in the same office every week, but you are likely to be embarking on a project that's going to take 6 to 10 years. So you better really know that you like this person. Life is way too short, and it's not just about money. We have agency. We get to choose who our partners are most of the times. We're not a large pension fund. So you better get to know your potential partner first, and you better trust them, because I want to do business with people that I like. I want to do business with people that I trust. I want to enjoy their company, because there's going to be very difficult conversations along the way. There's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be points where you're looking at each other going, okay, what do we do now? Something has changed. And you better know that partner is going to treat you with the same integrity and trust that you're treating them with. So for me, it's all to do with, can you live with that person for the next decade? Very important. So where do those shared values come from? Again, they come from your track record. They come from how you deal with your consultants, how you deal with your trades, how you deal with your lenders. And I think you can do your homework on people. You can ask around. And I'm really proud of the feedback I get when I speak to potential partners and they say, yeah, we've done our homework. You do come with a lot of integrity. You're very well regarded. And that's really important. We pay our consultants, we pay our trades. Yeah, there might be occasions where there are cash flow issues, but you communicate. But the intent is never to shortchange people. And the intent is always to work with respect and honesty.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Can I ask you, again, you have a wide spanning career and across different sectors and industries. If you were to look back and you look at the most challenging project that you've worked on, which is it fair to say it was the Ace Hotel, or was it not the challenging one?
I've had a couple. I think the Ace probably was the most unique and challenging. I've mentioned building it during COVID, but the design was nuts. It was designed by a local architecture firm, a highly regarded Shim Sutcliffe, who are absolute geniuses. There's no question. They are thinking on a different level. But as a constructor, trying to figure out how to take that design that I described as bonkers many times and try and translate it into a real life project is extremely challenging. It was a very small postage stamp of a site. I would encourage anyone that hasn't been to the Ace before to take a walk down. It's at 51 Camden Street in Toronto. Just walk in. If you are genuine about being a construction person or a development person, I'm not saying you have to go and buy a meal there or go and buy a coffee or a beer. Just take a walk through it. It is the most splendid project in the city. All the details and every angle, everywhere you look, it is just a smorgasbord of fabulousness. It's so wonderful. All the angles, the materials. I'm so proud that when I walk through that with people in the industry who understand construction, that they really get what we achieved. But it just about killed us doing it. It was very challenging. So it's probably my proudest moment. I've had harder projects, I think, financially than that. And that's not without stress. Again, we mentioned being in business with people for 6 to 10 years, but working on a project that has its financial challenges is extremely stressful. And to your listeners who may be thinking about getting into development, who may be thinking about getting into construction, make sure that you're getting the right advice, because when you go down this path, when you buy a piece of land and you hire an architect and you've sold your product, if you're selling condos as an example, you're locked in and you're going to have to see it to the end. There's no walking away from it. You have to execute. So make sure you have the right advice. Make sure you hire the right consultants. And again, consultants you trust, consultants that really know your stuff, that they're not just mailing it in, they're not just giving you a report because, it's checking a box. Question the costs, question the site logistics, question everything, and you will do well. But don't just take things at face value, and don't think that development is a get-rich-quick scheme, because it is not. A lot of hard work goes into this.
I want you to please take us to those hard projects when you were in the thick of it. And the reason I asked this is that I believe we potentially have clients and listeners who went through that exercise that you just explained. And these days, based on the market conditions and the way that the costs have turned, they might be in the thick of it. They might be having those hard decisions that come up daily. And they're like, okay, what do we do today? What do we do with this? Do you have a mental model, a framework, a decision-making criteria or process or ritual that helps you go through that? Like, Monday morning, you pick up the phone. There's a, which unfortunately happens to us more than we like to admit. There's an issue that was not on the radar before. How do you go through that? What's your mental process?
It's an excellent question. I describe development and construction as just getting punched in the face every day as you're walking forward. So I think
very true.
I think you get used to the problems. You get used to the curveballs, but it's difficult not to have it affect your mental well-being, because some of them are real world, real cost issues that you have to wear. So how do you do that? You have certainly the proforma for me is the key. You have to understand all your line items. You have to understand exactly what you're getting into. You have to understand your tax position. You have to understand what HST means. If you are getting into development and you don't understand the component pieces, then I would encourage you to find a cost consultant that you really like and really trust, and become the biggest pain in the arse to them that they've ever had by showing up at their office, demanding a 2 or 3 hour meeting, and going through the budget in line item by line item, because the only way to understand the financial pressures that you're about to get into is by understanding all the component pieces. And it all comes down to dollars and cents. So what will happen is that if you encourage your cost consultant to strip too much out of it because you want it to look rosier, just be aware of what you're cutting out. Be aware of what your true baseline position is, because if you want to kid your investors, but at the same time you're kidding yourself, you are going to end up in trouble. So do a rigorous and robust test on each line item, figure out where the risks are, figure out what can go wrong, and make sure you've got enough contingency to survive the challenges that are going to come. And they will come, and some of them will put you on the ground, and you have to figure out, how are you going to get up? Who do you trust to pick you up off the floor and solve your problems? And having a design team and strong financial consultants next to you that can solve your problems is really going to get you through it. People that just bring a little bit of calm and levity. We talked about partners earlier. There is nothing worse than being with shouty partners that are just snapper heads and they get excited all the time. You're going to have to deal with these problems very calmly, very methodically, pragmatically, and working through, how do we solve this issue? And if everybody's just going to lose their SHIT all the time, it's going to be a tough 10 years. That's all I'm going to say.
Amen. Amen to that. That's the name of the game. And like you said, we have to have a thick skin and willingness to roll with the punches as we go through this.
Yeah, I tell you, the other key thing is, if you don't ask, you don't get. Right. So there is a solution to every problem, and they all have a different solution. Possibly trying to get closer to your city councillor may help you. Trying to sit closer to your city staff may help you. Trying to figure out who at City Hall can help you work around a problem. People are generally willing to help if you're respectful and ask the right questions. And maybe you'll save a few bucks along the way.
Your that last paragraph sentence there was very polished. My less polished version of that is that we typically get a call from the site super on a Monday morning or Tuesday morning, whenever, and sometimes they're freaking out and say, "Oh, we have a problem. We have a big problem. This is going on." Like, my first question to them typically is, "Did anyone die?" Because that's the only thing we can fix, and that would be very unfortunate. But aside from that, if no one has died or, God forbid, has lost a limb, we can fix pretty much everything else. It's a matter of who you call, what options you come up with, how much you cost, you budget for, how much you pay for. And then you figure out a way. You just roll with it and you go forward.
Could not agree more. And funnily enough, I had that same conversation about 2 weeks ago. There was an issue on site, and that was my first question was, is anyone injured? Like, where are we with site safety? That is number one, and always has to be. And I probably, through the course of that day, I asked that question 3 or 4 times as more information came to light. Yeah, most things can be solved, but you're never going to solve somebody getting hurt or, God forbid, losing their life, which would just be nothing short of tragedy for when we are trying to build this city up.
Exactly. That's not what we do this for. So with that said, I want you to please zoom out a little bit and bring in your international context, bring in your international work experience, education, and look at our industry, look at our city, or if you want to go wider, look at our country right now. I think maybe we just stick to the GTA area for the time being. And what were the first shockers when you came to Canada and said, really, is that how you do things here? Is there like, why would you do that? Why are you not doing this? Or did anything stick out to you and say, listen, like, this is just weird. Why? Because I know I had experience, and just put light on that. When I came here about 10 years ago, I saw a few things. I'm like, why are you guys doing this way? And it had to do with construction methods, had to do with policy, it had to do with financing, it had a whole bunch of things. And I've learned a lot. I'm not saying what we did back home or other than Canada was fine, but I always am curious when I have people on the podcast who have international experience. Were there anything that you saw that was like, this doesn't make sense?
So I'll be honest, I didn't come to Canada with enough experience to actually have those initial thoughts. I'm going to answer it slightly differently, which is probably not what you're looking for, but When I came to Canada, I was extremely impressed. I think the place was clean. The place was very pleasant. Canadians had a reputation around the world for being very nice, was definitely true. I was shocked at how nice they were and seemed genuine. So good for Canadians. I think I would say that we've lost our way a little bit and I'm not going to get into the construction, but what was different. I feel the city that I came to is not what it was. I think it is not as clean. It is not as well run. It doesn't mean that people are not trying to run it correctly, but I feel that we are a city in decline. There's no way I'm the only one that's feeling that. So I think we just have to have a bit of a reset here on a number of things. The civil code is how I would describe it. We all have an obligation living in society to do our fair share, to drive appropriately, to treat each other appropriately, to shovel our sidewalks, to do all the things that are required to be decent citizens. And I do feel that in the 25 years that have gone before us, that civil contract in Toronto is not as strong as it was. And I'm not a politician. I don't know how we get back to that, but I feel we have lost our way a little bit. And again, I don't need to point fingers at politicians. I do believe that everyone is doing their best. But just as a society, we're not as Canadian as we were 25 years ago. And that's a shame. That's my big answer. The small answer on the construction side is, and we talked about this, was the absolute horror I had when I came here and walked onto my first formwork slab. And the bars were 6 inches apart, 10 mil bars. And I'd come from a large civil project in Hong Kong where we had 3 meter deep beams jam packed full of 60 mil rebar bars. And I was horrified at just how under-designed the buildings were here. But then, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, turns out that this was just a foundation for a 120-story tower that was going on it later.
It made sense.
So now I realise that we're not under-designing the buildings. It's just that my first project was so wildly over-designed, I had no clue what I was doing.
Yeah, you and I talked about that offline, that I almost got fired my first job in Canada in construction, because I went through a job site and to my semi-educated eye, the amount of rebar in the forming was just didn't seem right. So I had to stop the concrete pour. I want to ask you, I'm going to try and wrap this up in a couple more questions here. Are there any industry trends that you're seeing that makes you optimistic for the next 5 to 10 years? And it could be a trend in technology or the market or anything that you think, you know what, this is good. Like you mentioned your kids and your daughters there, and you would say, you know what, this is a good thing when I don't know if they have any interest in the industry or they're definitely going to be affected by it. Are there any trends that you feel optimistic about?
Yeah, I think we touched on it before. I do believe that the industry is maturing. I think those of us that have enjoyed the condo boom are pulling back, a little bit more reflective. I do believe that we're going to set ourselves up for better products moving forward. I mentioned that we're making slightly larger suites. I believe that we're trying to design for the human being. We certainly are, and I think that's really important. There is a suite type for everyone. It's not about the size of the suites, but it's really about the livability. I think that the Canadian experience prior to the 2005 Places to Grow legislation, which was really the trigger for the density that we had, I think the standard Canadian ethos was that people wanted to own their own home and more likely own a low-rise home with a backyard. So I think that is less attainable now, but I do believe that we still have the opportunity to build very high quality, livable suites with good outdoor space, good indoor amenity space. I think there's a few things that we have done badly over the period. I think we have added too much complication onto the projects that we've built. I understand sustainability rules, but I think they just have to be re-examined, because what's happening is that certain ideologies, and sustainability is important, but if it comes at the cost of affordability, that's where we've lost our way. So if you look at where do we lose our way? If you look at the peak of the condo business before we took a bit of a pause, which probably started about 4 years ago. Condos downtown were selling about $16.50 a square foot for good product, but really what we would call standard. I think what we need to do is build an industry for the future that is more sustainable, that isn't quite as erratic and subject to inflationary pressures. Now, you can't really control everything. We live in a global market. But I think somehow as a group, we need to make sure that we're running proformas based on standard inflation models, 2-3%. At one point 5 years ago, I would say that inflation was probably higher than 10% in our industry. I think the fees that were imposed upon us by different levels of government were not subject to those rigorous processes. Everyone likes to talk about development charges, and I will too. I was there running proformas every time those doubled. And it was ridiculous. What happened was development charges would go up, developers would raise their prices, trades would see that developers were raising their prices and they'd want a piece of the action. And it just became this feeding frenzy. It's not just about the trades and the developers and the consultants raising prices. If you actually look at the profit levels that developers have made over the years, they haven't really changed. But I would encourage our partners at the city to just stop seeing development as a cash cow, whether it's building permit fees, whether it's staging fees for bike lanes or car traffic lanes, or whatever it is. Just put them up modestly. And first of all, let's start by just slashing them down to 10% of what they are right now, because the whole concept of growth paying for growth is redundant. We should all pay for growth. We're all enjoying this city. We should all pay for the libraries and the transit and the roads. Why should it just be the new immigrant or the investor that has to pay for growth? That makes no sense.
Thank you very much. And the fact that these increasing costs and DCs and everything else that you just named there, it actually prevents projects from happening. If you look at it, the actual, what the city did collect from those increases, it will probably not as much as they hoped to collect in terms of, because the projects basically didn't get built. And if you're not building, you're not paying those DC fees or all the other fees. And it will to some extent backfire. So there's probably a sweet spot somewhere that you can get stuff built and you still get some payments. And to your point, like at the end of the day, if we want a vibrant city, if we want a vibrant community that has new lifeblood injected into it by new population, we need to make sure that everyone chimes in and gets things going. We have a magic wand question on this podcast, which I suspect you might have already touched on. But if you were to give you a magic wand for the next 5 minutes and you could make one wish, and this wish would be to change a way of thinking, a regulation, a policy, whatever you want to pick, to make sure that we are in a better position 2 years from now, 5 years from now, as it pertains to our industry, as it pertains to affordable housing, affordability in the housing market. And what would that one wish be?
Wow, one wish. And I can't just take a few $1 billion and head to the Caymans.
Yeah, we'll do that after.
That's my second wish. I think my one wish is pretty boring, actually. I want predictability. I want an industry where I am not constantly reacting to negative factors influencing costs. I think we got so greedy as an industry, and I don't mean you or me or any one individual specifically, but I would love to just have a consistent approach where I can predict the future and I'm not subject to changes coming at me from City Hall or the province or the feds. A sustainable, simple approach to our proformas where I can go in with $100 million proforma and in 3 years when I get to build, it's maybe gone up 2 or 3% per year, as opposed to going up 20%, which is pretty common. Now, I will say that is complete fantasy, and I appreciate the question in itself with the magic wand is an element of fantasy. But the variables that go into development and construction are bananas. Now, there has to be thousands of moving parts, thousands of stakeholders, big or small. So I don't think you're ever going to be able to control that. But that would be my one wish: predictability and sustainability on an economic level.
Amen. Thank you very much, Stuart. This has been fun. Is there anything that I haven't asked you, or do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Oh, I think this has been great. I would thank you for having me on. I think we've chatted a couple of times, and I think the good work that you're doing is important. I think having these discussions where we can have an open and frank discussion on how our industry works is really important. There's a lot of good people trying to do good things in this industry. We sometimes get a bad rap for being greedy developers or however we're described, but my experience is fairly consistent across the board. There's just a lot of good people trying to build good product, improve the city, and then get paid along the way. There's not a lot of guys driving around in gold Lamborghinis. I think it's just a bunch of decent people who are trying to give this city what it needs. I appreciate you having us on. I appreciate getting the message out there and doing the good work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate you saying that one of the reasons we started this podcast was to break the myth around the big bad developer, that everyone who's trying to do that is a big bad developer. And quite frankly, a lot of, like you said, I've had the privilege of working with and for a lot of developers over the past 20 years or so. And mostly like 99% of them are entrepreneurs, hardworking people, they're service providers, and they're trying to make something happen in terms of legacy for themselves, for their families, and for their communities, and they get paid for it. And sometimes when we're sitting in the back and look at these proformas and get those phone calls, I know we have had this question more than once, or many times more than once, come up that why do we do what we do? Because it's just too hard. There are days that are really hard, but thank you for doing what you're doing. I'm hoping that we can have a part 2 of this conversation in a year or two, and we might have better news and hopefully new lessons to share with the audience. Thank you, Stuart.
I'd love that.
Have a great day.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Just one last thing before you leave, please make sure to visit our website. We have put together a whole bunch of different resources that you can download for free from our website. These include checklists, manuals, and also access to previous webinars. In case you have missed any of our previous webinars, you can go there, get the replay link, download the slides, and benefit from all these free resources that we've gathered on the website. Please make sure to visit. Thank you.